Hi everyone, it's Sandra and you're looking at Cinderella, my kitchen worm bin. And when I walk by and I see something like this, some dried bouquets, some tissues, a rose stem that we actually cut out of our garden this year, but sadly lost its petals in just a few days. When I see this accumulating on top of Cinderella, some grape stems, I think it's time to feed the worms. So let's open it up and take a look. So let's dig down through the bin and see what we find. Obviously a corn cob here with still some worms hiding out underneath it. That's cool that they're still finding interest in the summer corn cob months later. Cinderella has 3 of these corn cobs in them. They were all put in the same day. Some may not have been buried as well as the others, so some may be further advanced. I also have these Starbucks cups wrappers still hanging around in here. I say wrappers because they're the inner linings. I'm sorry, not a wrapper, but these are the linings to Starbucks cups. You can see the worms on them. These are some wooden cutlery from a road trip that we made. And so, you know, Cinderella gets a potpourri of things. And here's the 3rd corn cob, buried a little bit more than the others. And you can see lots of castings building up in between this irregular, unusual bedding materials. A lot of you would add corn cobs and whatnot, but I try to put bedding mixtures in Cinderella that I keep out of the bins that I use for, you know, producing castings more regularly, easier to sift, that sort of thing. Funnily enough, Cinderella actually cranks faster than most of my other bins, and I think I figured out why. So let me show you. Hang on a moment. As most of you know, I have multiple sclerosis and I use a mobility scooter. So I've got Cinderella up on a little utility stool so that it's easier for me to reach in and service the bin. But what I didn't realize until very recently when our heat clicked on is that Cinderella is right over top of one of our forced air heating vents. It's nighttime when I'm filming, so it's not really bright in here. But there's one of our forced air heating vents under Cinderella, which keeps this bin, especially when the heat is going, obviously, nice and toasty. I think that's why she processes and breeds faster than my other bins. Interesting. All right, let's feed her up. I used Cinderella's brown grocery bag to put some of that large material on and move it to one side so I can turn over this area that was my previous feeding zone. If I find other large chunk material like this mango pit, I will also just throw it to one side. And that gives me, it's more able to turn this over. When you use a regular bedding like this and you get these large bits of material, it is harder to turn the material over. Now what I just found in there is an entire sunflower head that I put in. Interesting. Nothing sprouting on it, so I wondered whether I got all the seeds out of it. Well, the worms are eating up the residue, so I'll just invert that on the grocery bag. They'll be fine. It's their grocery bag, and that's just a bit of cardboard. Oh, that's that packing tape wrapper, or packing tape roll, I think. So you can see the beautiful castings, and if you've been following Cinderella's playlist all along, you might be like, wow, Sandra puts this irregular bedding in this bin, and look at the breeding, because I use these worms to populate new bins. So I bait worms out of Cinderella all the time, but they always bounce back. They always just breed up and populate this bin quickly again. And it never clued into me that being on top of the heat register may have something to do with it. All right, so this bin obviously through the winter anyway stays warmer than my other bins that are just sitting out at room temperature. So what I've got is I've got some nice castings starting to accumulate here again. It hasn't been that long since I harvested Cinderella. I'll put the date on the screen. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to invert this brown paper the other way and do the same thing on the other side. So like I said, I'm just going through this material, and if I do find, large bits that would benefit from being on the bottom of a feeding zone, for instance, I can always do that. These avocado pits, they take time. Sometimes they cleave in two in a way that it takes longer for them to go mushy. And so Cinderella is never had a moisture problem. There's another Starbucks wrapper coming out. Okay, so you can see how the castings are starting to accumulate, and they're looking beautiful. They're absolutely looking beautiful in here. All right, and the worms aren't too shabby either. Good, healthy worms in Cinderella. All right, I think I will feed down this end, which seemed to be a lot drier than the other end. So I'm just going to push the castings to this side, lift this paper up, and then expose that right down to the bottom. So just a moment. So I've basically piled the castings to one side. This is probably about an 8-inch or more, 10-inch pile of worms and castings, some still larger bits of material in it. The old large bit material is there, so I'm now just going to empty the grocery bag contents onto there. So this is all my old irregular bedding, and there's a lot of it. So I think I said this the last time I harvested Cinderella, I'm under no expectations that I'm going to harvest this bin soon, but now let me put in that new carbon, the flower stems and everything that I had set aside on the top of the bin. So we've got some flower stems, a toilet roll, some tissues, those grape stems. The rose stem had thorns on it, so I'm going to have to be careful with that when I'm fluffing the bin. And because this material isn't that moist, the rose stem still had some moisture left in it, but I'm going to take some of my lovely leaf mold here, and I'm just going to inoculate this area, as well as the leaf mold has good moisture in it. So I'll just do that, and that will help speed this along so Cinderella doesn't get totally stuck with a stack of dry, carbony, dried stems. All right, so now the food is going to go on top of that, and then I'm going to pull the castings over the entire thing. So the food is just a mixture of my food scraps, not pumpkin this time around, and blended up with eggshell put in the powdered eggshell put in the last few pulses, just to give it an added bit of grit and pH buffer. So just a little bit more of my lovely leaf mold on top, and then we're just gonna put Cinderella and her worms right over this whole area and hopefully cover up the food. So now I've kind of created more of a mountain on this side than the side that I was sort of gently massaging into the finished castings. But I'm sure the worms will find their way over there, and this side will start to compress down. I think I've covered the food well enough, maybe a little bit more. But see all the cocoons in here, cocoon, 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 cocoon. There's cocoons everywhere in Cinderella. I really do think having it on a heat vent helps. Now we live in a zone that our heat does not crank all day in the winter, and it's right next to a low E window, so it does, even though it's next to a window, it doesn't get heat from the sunlight either. So just a cautionary note, if you're going to try this, I wouldn't do it if your furnace was cranking all day long. All right, everyone, that's our check-in on Cinderella and a tip that maybe will help you get better breeding and cocoon hatching and faster castings production if you have a heat vent that you could put your worms on a stool on top of. All right, everyone, take care.